Hello everybody and welcome back. As always, I'm Mateo311 and this is your channel for everything VR related. Today, we're checking out some of the most overlooked VR games of all time. These are plenty of sleeper hits that you guys most likely have never heard of, and we're gonna change that today. Now, I actually reached out to you guys on social media asking what are the titles that you think deserve a lot more respect in the VR industry that no one talks about, and I got a huge list. So I went through that list, found the games that I absolutely agree with, and a couple that I unfortunately never got around to trying, but I have heard great things. So we're going to break all of that down. I will separate it based on like my overall hype level, but let's just jump right into that. There are of course links and timestamps if you want to skip ahead. But first up, we're starting with a game that was actually one of my all-time favorites, but due to some bizarre mystery, it was pulled from the Steam store, and the versions that still exist on Viveport and Rift no longer work. So I won't waste more of your time on this no longer existing game, but I had to mention it because it was the inspiration for my thumbnail and this video. But moving on to another robot-themed game that more people should have tried was Robo Recall. In all honesty, this game was way ahead of its time, and one of the first VR games to be much more than just your typical wave shooter. Robo Recall offered up fantastic graphics, a cool little storyline, and most importantly, some absolutely fantastic mechanics. You weren't just shooting down tons of enemies, but instead taking them out with style. You could teleport up to them, rip an arm off, and beat them to death with it, bobble enemies in the air with your bullets, or even catch their own projectiles and return them to sender. Honestly, guys, this game was absolutely fantastic, way ahead of its time. Beautiful mechanics with tons of replayability. I just loved it. I was always dying for a sequel, and they did at one point in time port this game to the Quest, but it was just like a shell of its former glory and never really caught on. So that was one of my favorite, but let's move on to some other recommendations. Now, a much newer title that came up multiple times in your recommendations was Propagation Paradise Hotel. Now, I'm definitely in agreement here because when the game initially released, I just wasn't that excited about it. The campaign also has a pretty slow start, which probably turned off a bunch of people, but if you hunker down for 25 minutes or so, it definitely starts to get really good, and you'll feel plenty of that old school Resident Evil inspiration throughout the title. It's not your guns blazing type of experience, but rather much more of an anxiety-inducing, horror story-driven title. But again, we know horror just isn't for everyone. Similar to the genre of our next title, VTOL. VTOL is an absolutely incredible flight simulator. It straddles an extremely fine line of high-end complexity with just enough arcadiness to give it mainstream appeal. Now, the graphics might not look much on flat screen, but they definitely sell the overall immersion and occasionally look quite good in VR. Now, I've talked about it many times on the channel before, and I'm just not a sim fan. I know VR is amazing for sims, but it's just not for me. However, something about VTOL had the magic that sucked me in. I was completely willing to learn the complex controls, and I was laughing as I failed. It was just really fun to get into and super satisfying when you achieve something. Like, honestly, just taking off and successfully landing is a challenge, and when you pull it off, you're like, all right, I am awesome. And then next thing you know, you're in dogfights and things are getting crazier and crazier. Plus, there's the Steam Workshop for new content. They've added helicopters in it. It's just an all-around great title. Highly recommend. Now, for the RPG fans out there, another highly overlooked title is Vengeful Rites. This game is clearly a labor of love, and the developer not only delivered a full story-driven campaign, but also gave us plenty of fantastic VR-based mechanics. Excluding Skyrim with about 1,000 mods added to it, this is one of the most comprehensive and immersive VR RPG titles available. Now, I know there's not a ton of VR RPG competition out there, but this game is still definitely worth checking out in 2024. But if you're just looking for some straight action, you absolutely have to check out Synapse. Now, I will say it's a bit of a stretch to call this a sleeper title, and its lack of popularity is mainly due to the fact that it's only on the PlayStation VR 2. I'm sure the vast majority of PSVR 2 owners who like shooters have played this game. That being said though, I'd love to hype it up even more because this game definitely deserves a Quest and PCVR port. The storyline of the game has you interrogating people by entering their minds. This plays out as a trippy grayscale world with the occasional flashes of neon color. As you spend more time in this world, you gain telepathic abilities, which makes you end up feeling like a Sith Lord who's packing some serious heat. But if you're into VR, more for immersion and storytelling, I highly recommend Westworld Awakening. This game takes place in the universe of HBO's hit series Westworld and gives you a whole new look in some major turning points of the overall series. Overall, the game switches back and forth between cutscenes and immersive storytelling, some minor puzzle solving, and finally a cat and mouse horror game similar to something like Outlast or Jurassic World Aftermath. As a fan of the Westworld series, I absolutely love this one. It felt like you were there, learning more about the series, getting inside information, and the storyline just fit in so well. So if that's something you're looking for, you enjoy a bit of horror, storytelling, some minor, puzzle mechanics, go check this out. It's about 5 hours long, and I really enjoyed it. Now, if you're looking to try out something that's truly unique, nothing surpasses Beanstalker. Honestly, this is one of the titles that I thought didn't look impressive at all until I finally got into it. Beanstalker offers up some of the most unique gameplay elements and highest replayability of any VR title. This is almost like a part crafting, survival, and first-person shooter title. You'll travel to different worlds populated by these ginormous beanstalks, and from there, you're really just looking for some raw materials to build up an epic arsenal. Now, when you eventually feel properly equipped, there are some epic boss battles, and another one of the game's best features is it's fully playable in co-op. So if you have a bunch of PCVR friends who are looking to jump into something new and interesting, I highly recommend Beanstalker. Now, staying on the topic of games that don't look like much from their flat screen trailer, but are actually fantastic once you get into them, we have Ghost Signal, a Stellaris story. This is honestly a VR roguelike title unlike anything else you've ever played before. Steering around your little ship and engaging multiple enemies might not look like much, but in practice it is just so rewarding. The storyline has you attempting to track down a mysterious signal, which ends up trapping you in a time loop. Between runs you'll be unlocking permanent upgrades, but in true roguelike fashion, every single gameplay session will be unique. Overall, it's filled with plenty of risk versus reward, extremely satisfying combat and mechanics, a ton of replayability, and a cool little storyline. The day I installed Ghost Signal, I played it for 6 hours straight, and honestly, that's longer than like your average VR game. Now, after that 6-hour single day session, I continued to play this game almost every single day for like the next month or two. I was just super addicted to it. It was extremely fun, and if you like some of that strategic combat, spaceship, roguelikes, honestly, it should be at the top of your list. Now, speaking of games that should be at the top of the list, Defector was another one of those games that was ahead of its time, as it attempted to be a jack of all trades. The storyline was like a James Bond action film that had you jumping out of planes, utilizing spy equipment, and of course covertly taking out some enemies. There was a huge variance in mechanics between missions, ranging from a flat-out first-person shooter to your typical action movie chase scene, an unforgettable interrogation mission, and finally just some cool storytelling. Now again, the overall game was excellent and still worth checking out, but I will say it was probably a little bit too overambitious. It tried to do too much. It was a jack of all trades that really didn't master any. The first-person shooter was fun, but not like fantastic. The interrogation scene, I loved. That was great. Some of the chase stuff was really cool. Storyline goes a little cliche here and there, but honestly, overall, very solid title that offers up a lot more than you typically get in VR. Now, I just have one more sleeper recommendation until we move on to the titles that I'm yet to get into. When the extremely unique 1v1 shooter Blaston initially released from Resolution Games, there was definitely a good amount of hype surrounding it, and even some talk about this being a new type of esports game. Now, a lot of time has passed since then, and Blaston never received the love of something like Echo Arena, but it's still an excellent game that I highly recommend, especially because it went free to play a while back. If you only go and check out one game on today's list, make it Blaston, because like I said, it's free to play. It's really fun. You don't have to play online against people. You can play against AI. Just get into it, have a good time, and it's actually a decent workout. It has you moving around a lot, and it's truly unique. Now, that was my list, or rather the list provided by you guys, the community, that I agree with. Now we're moving on to the games that you guys have recommended, but I personally have never even tried. Let's just move right into it, starting with Jet Island. Now, in truth, I actually have tried this game a little bit, but just could not get into it. Jet Island places you on a hoverboard and has you gliding through a massive open world at some extreme speeds. Now, in truth, I probably just didn't give this game enough time because everyone I talk to loves it, and the Steam reviews for it are overwhelmingly positive. Apparently, I just missed some amazing mechanics, massive boss fights, and some sweet co-op play. Now, another early title that I always wanted to get into, but just never got around to it, was House of the Dying Sun. While I said I'm not a big fan of flight sim games, that doesn't extend to space sims. I was a huge fan of Star Wars Squadrons, and it looks like this offers up some very similar action. Now, another title that I missed that was definitely my style was From Other Suns. This was almost like a spacefaring sci-fi version of Borderlands, where up to 3 players can quickly jump in for some action, over time unlock a huge arsenal of weapons, and even upgrade your own spaceship. I truly believe I would have loved this title if I played when it first came out, and this feels like yet another title that was ahead of its time. And last up on today's list is Tales of Glory. This game is basically Chivalry in VR, and I feel like an absolute jerk for never getting around to it. There's full physics combat, massive scale battles, and a 30+ hour sandbox style campaign. Honestly, from what I heard, this game is a true VR sleeper hit. I think unfortunately it just came out in that 2020 era when PCVR was dying out, people were losing interest, and it was drying up, unfortunately. Like, I feel like this is the epitome of what today's video was about. A high quality game that most people haven't heard of and really should have played. Now, if you enjoyed today's video or you have other recommendations, games that should have been on this list that I didn't talk about, drop them in the comments. Let me know how you felt about this. Give me a thumbs up. If you're new here, consider subscribing, and you know how we're going to end this.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe for my daddy.
Good job.
Bye.